Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Today's topic, we're going to speak on manual corrections within payroll. And the reason I picked this topic today is in support, we do get quite a few questions regarding manual checks. It can be a little bit intimidating sometimes if you don't know, or if you're unfamiliar with the manual check process. So I hope today will bring you some good information and ease your possible anxieties and hesitations when doing a manual check. There are three types of manual checks that can be processed. When you go into the manual check window, which we'll see in a little bit, there are three check types that you can choose from. The first is manual checks, the second is adjustments, and the third is beginning balances. We'll discuss each one of these types in detail as we go through our presentation, and shows a couple of examples, or one example each, for each type that we'll be discussing today. The first one is a manual check. And that's exactly what it is. It's very self-explanatory. Manual checks are, if you can imagine, if you had to write a manual check out of your checkbook at your desk for whatever reason, if you had to manually do a check, maybe reimburse somebody for some correction that needed to be made, something that needed to be done quickly, you would possibly use this type of check to put this information into the GP system. Manual checks will update payroll, bank reconciliation, and general ledger. So when you choose this type, please remember what buckets are going to be affected when you do process this check type. Recording a manual written check, making negative adjustments for negative manual checks cannot be saved in a batch. So also remember that. So if it's a negative, if you're decreasing something, you're going to have to do it transactionally. It cannot be saved in a batch. GP will not accept it that way. If you are doing several manual corrections that are a positive pay or a positive effect, then you certainly can go in and save those in a batch in the manual check type. In our example, we're going to reduce a federal tax and wages for an employee. Let's say, for instance, an employee's a benefit or a deduction was set up incorrectly for tax. Maybe it was not sheltered and it should have been. So this employee would have to be reimbursed for those federal taxes that were withheld that should not have been originally. And if you notice at the bottom of my slide, I have this red note here, and I do repeat this throughout our slides simply because it is just so very important to remember. Microsoft Dynamics GP does not automatically calculate anything for you when you process a manual check, any one of those three types. As such, you need to know exactly what amounts need to be entered and adjusted. So please remember, when you're going to do a manual check, any of these three types, please remember that you have to know what buckets need to be changed or edited. So if you're going to do a change on some wages, probably the taxes, like federal taxes, possibly your Social Security and Medicare, FICA taxes, possibly state, local. Maybe other things are impacted by that change. So I like to, in my own practice, write down the list or run a simulation of what the change is going to be in GP in my test environment to see exactly what is being affected, the amounts that are being included, how GP calculated it, and I print that out so that when I do go into a manual check scenario, I have that and I'm going to hit every single bucket that needs to be changed so that this employees or those employees W-2 information will be correct when you're reconciling payroll at the end of the month or quarter at year end, that they'll all be in balance, that nothing was forgotten. Also, there is a website that I can share with you if you don't already know it, is paycheckcity.com. That's a very reliable, very easily accessed site that I've used many times to run scenarios or simulations of a situation to know what kind of taxes are going to be taken out, how a net pay is going to be affected. Maybe I need to know a gross up. You know, I will run those scenarios in that site also, and you can print out that information and use that as well if you feel more comfortable with that. Okay, so here in our screen print here, you can see the 3 check types of manual check, adjustment, and beginning balances. In this manual check that we have marked here, you're going to see a payment number, and then you can do a batch ID, you can do a comment, you have to select your payroll checkbook that's going to be affected. You need to have a check number so you can manually enter that. Make sure that you enter the check date and the posting date that's going to be affected to the bank rec and to the general ledger. And then, of course, you're going to select your employee ID. And then we'll go into transactions, and we'll enter our transactions. And you can also click on your distribution button when you're done just to see how it looks. Okay, so let's go into our example here. I'm going to go into our GP system. I'm going to go down to HR Payroll. I'm going to go up here under Payroll, Manual Checks, and I'm going to make sure that my manual check is selected. I'm not going to do a batch ID, and that is because we're going to do a decrease on some federal taxes that were over withheld for an employee. Remember, decreases, negative balances cannot be put into a batch ID in this situation. I'm going to leave the check number as is, but you certainly can change it to whatever you'd like. I'm going to leave these dates here, the check date and the posted date as the same. And I'm going to select my employee that I need to change the taxes for. Let's select Jenny. I'm going to go into transactions. Okay. And here you can see it's transaction type 38. I'm going to adjust the federal taxes that need to be decreased. So I'm going to select federal. And here you can see the dates again. You want to make sure those dates are correct. And we're going to reduce those federal taxes by $25. Let's just pretend this person had a $100 incentive that was paid out and that we need to pull that back. It was mistakenly taken out. So let's say we need an incentive. We tax it at a supplemental rate of $25 for the $100 wages that were earned. So I'm going to do a negative. Remember, a lot of us get used to entering positive numbers, but you have to think here we're reducing. So we're going to do a negative $25. I'm going to tab down. We have to touch those taxable wages. Don't forget to do that. $100. Okay. And then we're going to save this. I'm going to go out of this window, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to post. I'm going to close this window, and I want us to see the check register, the posting register. I'm not going to really need to see the pay type register or the department register or the position register. I don't need to see the deduction register or the benefit register. State taxes were not involved, local taxes were not involved, it wasn't a tip. But I do kind of want to check the checkbook posting register to make sure that they're displaying the expected results that I'm looking for. Okay, good. So here we have the check register. We see Jenny Doyle. We see that there is no gross pay, which is correct. We see that the deduction is being paid back, and we see a net pay of $25 for the check number 2003. That's the expected result that I'm looking for. So all that looks good so far. If I go down here, I can see that the payroll summary, the federal tax withheld, is reduced by $25. And I can see that the tax liability is also reduced by $25. I can see that the employee's bucket is going to show $25 in their net pay. So that's all good. That's what I'm expecting. Okay, what do we have here? We have the payroll check register, or payroll check posting register. Here we can see what's being affected here. We can see that the cash is getting credited $25, and we can see the federal withholding payable is being debited $25. And the checkbook posting, we can see that's all good too. And that's done. That's all it really, that's a very simple example, but that's all you really need to do in a manual check to make a correction. Just make sure that if it is something that you want or has several entries that need to be made, please make sure that you're hitting all those buckets that are necessary. If you forget one, GP is not going to know that you forgot one. It's not going to calculate anything like it does when you run a payroll batch. It will not know that you forgot to hit a certain bucket. So I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure that you know which buckets need to be hit and changed so that all of your payroll reconciliations will tie out. Good. Okay. Now, let's go on to the next slide. The next slide, we're going to talk about adjustments. And adjustments, again, are very self-explanatory. It's just that. It's an adjustment. In this check type, GP will update payroll and general ledger only. So again, remember when you're selecting your check type, think about what buckets have to be hit. In our previous example, for a manual check, it would touch bank reconciliation, it would touch payroll buckets, and it would touch general ledger. In this instance, in this situation, this check type, adjustment will only update payroll and general ledger. Therefore, there will be no check, there will be no check ID, checkbook ID, none of that. The gross and the net amounts must be zero. In this situation, in this check type, an adjustment has to be zero. There cannot be a gross or a net pay. Think about it this way. You're just moving one piece of data to another piece of data bucket. You're just swapping out buckets. In our example today, we're going to reduce someone's vacation hours and increase their sick hours. So let's use the scenario that Brenda Diaz took some time off. She was sick, but when the payroll clerk entered her time, she mistakenly put that 1 day of sick in her vacation bucket and now it needs to be adjusted. So we're going to move it out of the vacation and we're going to put it into the sick in this situation. And again, just down here, it's the same warning that I had shown you before. You know, let's make sure that you're hitting whatever needs to be hit because GP will not automatically calculate anything in the manual check window. Okay, let's go back to GP. And we're going to go into manual checks. I'm going to select the adjustment. Now, if you notice, you're going to see this window change just a bit when I go from manual check to adjustment. We now have an adjustment number rather than a payment number. You can select a batch ID, which we'll do in this situation because it's going to be 2 transactions for 1 employee. And just to show you a batch process, we'll do the batch ID in this situation. Again, we want to make sure our check and posting dates are right, but you can see now that the checkbook ID field is grayed out. There is no check number, that's grayed out. So this is a good indicator that, this is just an adjustment. This is not going to touch your bank reconciliation. All right, let's select our employee. We're going to select Brenda. And we're going to click on transaction. You know what? I'm going to go back just 1 second here. I'm going to pull up Brenda's, let's look at her PTO before we touch it. Oops, excuse me. Click here. And here in her PTO manager or maintenance window, you can see that she currently has vacation available of 80 hours and sick 80 hours. So when we do this adjustment, my expectation would be that these numbers will adjust per what we are trying to accomplish. So we're going to go into, I think I have those windows open. All right. So we're going to touch the pay code vacation. And I'm going to take $17.10 out. That's her hourly rate. But guess what we're doing? We're reducing the vacation. So here I thought, okay, I automatically typed it in, but we want to do it as a negative. We're going to reduce those 8 hours. Okay. I'm going to save this. And the next pay code I want to do is increase the sick. I'm going to enter the 1710, and I'm going to do 8 hours. Okay, so now we'll save this. We'll close out of here. We're going to go into our batches. You know what? I want to go back for a minute. I'm sorry. I don't think I ran that as a batch. I'm sorry. Okay, let's see. Hang on. Let's go into manual checks. I forgot to save it as a batch. My fault, guys. But if you were to save it as a batch, you would name the batch, and then you would go back and you would click on the batches window and post from that window. Okay. So let's take a look at these screens again. I do want to look at the pay type register because I just want to make sure that those pay types are captured correctly. Okay. This is good because the check register is showing nothing. I would expect it to show nothing because we're literally just moving from one bucket to another. There's really no pay that's going to happen here. And this is what I want to see here on the pay code posting journal. You can see that we have increased the sick pay by 8 hours and by $17.10. And you can see that her vacation was reduced 8 hours and reduced $17.10. And the amount paid is 0. This is exactly what we're looking for in an adjustment transaction. Okay, good. And again, we can look at our checkbook, and there should be nothing there, which is good. So that's an easy example of a beginning balance. Oh, did I forget to switch my screen, guys? I did. Oh, maybe I didn't. Good. Okay, good. And that's an example of the adjustments. So let's go to our next screen. Let's go to our next type. Our next type is a beginning balance. And again, beginning balances is what you would use to set up a payroll in GP. You could use this also for other adjustments that you might want to make just to the payroll bucket, because beginning balances will not update bank rec or general ledger. There is no check number associated with the beginning balance. The only thing a beginning balance will update is the payroll buckets, like your W-2 buckets. So we have also used this check type when at the end of the year, or if you, and hopefully you're doing your quarterly reconciles, W-2 reconciliations each quarter to keep yourself on track, make sure everything's flowing well. Beginning balance could be used too for that instance. If you needed to update a year-to-date, if you needed to just hit that one payroll bucket, the W-2 buckets, this would be what you want to use. But in this instance, we're just going to show you a beginning balance on entering new payroll for an employee. Let's say that you were using a different application and you came in and you began to use Great Plains Dynamics in quarter 2 or quarter 1 in February, let's say, and you needed to start entering beginning balances for your employees. Now, in this example, we would want to do this for probably a smaller company if it's going to be manually entered, as we're going to show you here. If it's a very large company, we normally do an integration through the SQL side, through the back side, but it would depend on your situation, your company size, how different your payroll is. What we would ask you to do is to check with us, give us a call, and let's have a conversation on what would be the easiest, most efficient, and accurate way to begin a new payroll for your organization. In this situation, what I did is I went ahead and I entered some information just to save on some time. Okay. So we're going to go in to manual checks, and I'm going to click on beginning balance. Again, you can see it's kind of like adjustments. It really doesn't change much, but again, you don't see a checkbook ID, you don't see a check number, but everything else is the same, a batch ID, an employee ID, transactions. So I am going to show you an edit list that I went ahead cancel here, do that. Go into batches. I'm going to show you the edit screen here. The edit list that I entered. I went ahead and I entered beginning balance for Roger. You can see what I did is I hit the payroll codes. I went in, I entered his year-to-date salary at the time. I entered taxes for year-to-date, his Social Security, his Medicare, state, 401k, and the gross wages, and what will be the net wages. You can see all of the edit lists here. This is something you would want to run just to make sure that everything you've entered is the way it should be. It gives you a good look of what's happening, and you want to check and make sure this all ties out before you go ahead and post. So in this situation, I'm happy with what I see. And then you would go ahead and you would just post this, and then you would just go and continue in with going into the payroll summaries, making sure that those are all correct for the employees, and run some audit reports to make sure that these are the actual results that you're looking for, and that you want to make sure that their W-2s are calculating correctly. I would recommend going through a bank not a bank reconciliation, but a payroll reconciliation like you would any other time. You know, a lot of people wait till the end of the year, but again, I've always suggested to do it maybe after every payroll or maybe after every quarter, to go through and click on your payroll, and this is in your reports. Go into your period end, select your period end. You can select your summaries. You can go from any amount of dates, any range of dates you'd like. And I want to select all employees. And here you can do a payroll summary. This is a really good report that I recommend that you run and that you can tie out to your 941 reports and balance all of your employees, make sure everything ties out. But after doing a beginning balance, this is something I'd highly recommend that you do as well. Now, there are some other things I'd like to talk to you about when you're entering manual checks. There are a lot of buckets that you may need to hit. And I made a little spreadsheet, here, that would show, well, let me open it up. I opened it up yesterday when I was running it. Let me see if I can find it on my computer. Here it is. I believe this is it. This is what it looks like. So this is a spreadsheet that I created yesterday for the webinar. I thought it might be helpful for those of you that need to make several adjustments in manual check windows when you have to enter all of those transactions and make sure you're hitting the buckets right. So here I can show you that pay code transactions, what you're going to do when you want to change something, how it's going to affect these other buckets here. And this one is for deductions. It looks at, you know, if you're going to do a positive amount, what it's going to affect, how it's going to affect it, and your taxes. Also, you know, you've got your federal taxes, your FICA taxes for Social Security, which are the same for Medicare, but I broke them out anyway. You can see that a positive amount is going to decrease the net wages. It's not going to affect those federal taxes, but the taxable wages are going to be affected. So if you're interested in having this, just let me know. I'd be happy to share this with you. I can send it to you on the slide deck, and I can send it to you as just this file itself if you care to see it or have it for your own use. Okay. So let's go to our review. So what we covered today are manual checks. We showed you how to correct federal taxes and wages by reducing them. And in the adjustments, we did a vacation hour and sick hour correction. We reduced the vacation hours by 8 and those wages, and we increased the sick hours and those wages. And in the beginning balances, we started with GP, setting up a new GP payroll for an employee, and kind of gave you some other ideas of how beginning balances can work in GP. Let's see, wanted to do this too. I forgot to show you after we made those PTO adjustments, we can see here on Brenda Diaz that her vacation available did increase and the sick decreased. So, okay, see here, I made that mistake. You know, I should have followed my chart. I should have, it actually went the opposite way. And if I would have looked at my chart, I would have known that. So when I decreased the vacation, it actually added 8 more. And when I thought I was doing a positive adjustment to sick, it actually decreased it. So again, I should have referred to my chart here, you know, and it would have helped me. So my mistake, but also a very good example of how what you think you're doing right could affect it adversely. So good. I'm glad I showed you this, and I hope that you can see why it's so important to know how to enter these transactions to get the right display that you want in your GP buckets. Good. All right. So any questions? Let me open this up for questions if anybody has any. I'll take everybody off of mute. And I don't see anybody writing any questions in the chat. Would anybody like to share their experiences with manual checks? Any good comments and experiences or struggles that you may have or that you've come across? I'd be happy to hear about them. If you don't want to share them online in this webinar, I would be happy to look at them with you or discuss them with you over the phone or a meeting, a conference call, or even via email. You can certainly reach out to me here. My contact information is right here on the screen. I'd love to hear from you. And I also have our contact information for implementation specialists. We would love to hear from you also. You can certainly contact us at any one of these, or you may certainly contact me directly this way as well. I want to thank all of you for joining our webinar today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to this. I hope it was helpful. I hope it gave you some insight, a little bit more understanding of what manual checks are and what they affect and how to do them. I want to thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.